The recent visit of Kenyan President William Ruto to the White House, marked by smiles, handshakes, and pledges of deepened cooperation, has ignited a firestorm of debate across the African continent. Is this a sign of a burgeoning strategic partnership, a testament to Kenya's growing influence on the global stage? Or is it a dangerous dalliance, a betrayal of African solidarity for the seductive whispers of Western patronage? As Ruto returns to Nairobi, his briefcase brimming with promises of increased trade and investment, a crucial question hangs in the air. At what cost? This essay delves into the heart of this debate, dissecting the implications of Kenya's deepening alliance with the United States and its potential impact on the African continent. The optics of the visit were carefully crafted, projecting an image of two leaders united in purpose, their nations drawn together by shared values and aspirations. Ruto, eloquent and charismatic, spoke of a new dawn in US-Kenya relations, emphasizing the potential for economic prosperity and security cooperation. His American counterpart, equally effusive in his praise, lauded Kenya as a vital partner in a region grappling with complex challenges. Yet, beneath the veneer of diplomatic pleasantries lies a complex web of geopolitical interests, historical baggage, and simmering resentment, raising uncomfortable questions about the true nature of this burgeoning partnership. Critics, their voices growing louder by the day, argue that Ruto, blinded by the allure of Western approval, is jeopardizing Kenya's hard-won sovereignty. They point to a history of Western exploitation on the continent, where promises of aid and development have often masked self-serving agendas. The specter of colonialism, though officially banished decades ago, continues to haunt the continent, its legacy etched in the unequal power dynamics that continue to shape global affairs. For many, Ruto's embrace of the US appears all too familiar, a dangerous regression to a time when African nations were mere pawns in a larger geopolitical game. On the other side of the debate, proponents of the alliance argue that Ruto, a shrewd political operator, is merely playing the hand he's been dealt. In a world increasingly defined by great power competition, they argue, aligning with a global superpower like the US is not a betrayal, but a strategic necessity. They point to the tangible benefits that such an alliance could bring: increased investment, access to advanced technology, and enhanced security cooperation in a region plagued by terrorism and instability. For them, Ruto is not a traitor, but a pragmatist, a leader willing to make tough choices in the national interest. Central to this debate is the question of whether Kenya's deepening alliance with the US truly serves African interests, or merely advances a Western agenda. Ruto has been vocal in his assertion that the partnership is based on mutual respect and shared values, emphasizing the potential for collaboration on issues such as climate change, trade, and security. He has positioned Kenya as a bridge between the US and the African continent, a key ally in promoting stability and prosperity in a region often overlooked by the global community. However, skeptics argue that the reality on the ground paints a different picture. They point to the US's long history of interventionism in Africa, often driven by a desire to counter Chinese influence or secure access to strategic resources. From military bases to economic policies, the US's footprint on the continent is undeniable, raising concerns about its true intentions. The recent surge in US military activity in Africa, particularly in the Horn of Africa, has done little to assuage these fears, fueling suspicions that Ruto's government is being drawn into a larger geopolitical struggle. Furthermore, critics argue that the economic benefits of the alliance are overstated. While increased trade and investment may sound appealing, they question whether these benefits will trickle down to ordinary Kenyans or simply enrich a select few. They point to past experiences with Western aid and investment, which have often been accompanied by conditions that undermine local industries and exacerbate inequality. The fear is that Kenya, rather than becoming an equal partner, will be relegated to the role of a junior partner, its economy increasingly dependent on the whims of its powerful ally. The debate over Kenya's alliance with the US is not merely an academic exercise. It has real-world implications for the lives of millions of Africans. At stake is the continent's ability to chart its own course, free from the shackles of its colonial past. It is a debate about sovereignty, self-determination, and the right of African nations to pursue their own development path without undue external interference. As the world watches, the outcome of this debate will have profound implications for the future of Africa. Section 3. Echoes of Colonialism, Western Influence in Kenya. To understand the current controversy, one must delve into the annals of history, to the era when European powers carved up the African continent, exploiting its resources and subjugating its people. While colonialism may be a distant memory, its legacy continues to cast a long shadow over Africa, shaping its political, economic, and social landscape. The scars of this exploitative past run deep, fueling a deep-seated mistrust of Western intentions and a yearning for true independence. In the post-colonial era, Western influence in Africa has taken on new forms, often operating through the levers of aid, trade, and diplomacy. While these tools can be used for good, they have also been deployed to advance Western interests, often at the expense of African priorities. From structural adjustment programs that have crippled local economies to military interventions that have destabilized entire regions, the West's track record in Africa is far from spotless. This history of exploitation and interference has created a deep well of resentment among many Africans who view Western engagement with skepticism and suspicion. The current debate over Kenya's alliance with the US taps into this historical trauma, reawakening old wounds and fueling fears that the country is once again being drawn into a relationship that serves Western interests above all else. The language of partnership and shared values rings hollow for many, who see it as a thinly veiled attempt to maintain Western hegemony in a rapidly changing world. The challenge for Kenya, and indeed for all African nations, is to navigate this complex geopolitical landscape, balancing the need for partnerships with the imperative of preserving sovereignty and independence. It is a delicate balancing act, fraught with risks and challenges. Yet it is a challenge that African nations must confront head-on if they are to break free from the shackles of the past and chart a new course for the future. Section 4. A pawn in the global chessboard. As the US and China lock horns in a battle for global dominance, Africa has become a key battleground. Both superpowers are vying for influence on the continent, recognizing its strategic importance and vast economic potential. This rivalry has placed African nations in a precarious position, caught between the competing interests of these global titans. Critics of Kenya's deepening alliance with the US argue that the country is being used as a pawn in this larger geopolitical game. They point to the US's growing military presence in the region, particularly its expanding base in Djibouti, as evidence of its desire to counter Chinese influence in the Horn of Africa. Kenya, with its strategic location and close ties to the US, risks becoming entangled in this rivalry, its interests subordinated to those of its powerful ally. Furthermore, critics argue that the US is using its economic clout to pressure African nations into taking sides. The Trump administration's Prosper Africa initiative, while touted as a means of promoting trade and investment, has been accused of being a thinly veiled attempt to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative. African nations, already struggling with debt and underdevelopment, are being forced to choose between these competing visions, risking their economic sovereignty in the process. The challenge for African nations is to avoid becoming pawns in this geopolitical chess game. They must resist the pressure to choose sides, instead pursuing a policy of strategic autonomy that prioritizes their own interests. This will require a delicate balancing act, engaging with both the US and China while safeguarding their own sovereignty and independence. Failure to do so risks perpetuating Africa's dependence on external powers, hindering its ability to achieve true development and prosperity. Section 5. Balancing Act Kenya between Africa and the West. Kenya, under Ruto's leadership, faces a formidable challenge, balancing its historical ties with the West against its commitment to Pan-Africanism and the pursuit of a united and prosperous Africa. This balancing act is further complicated by the reality that Kenya, like many African nations, relies heavily on Western aid and investment. The risk is that in its eagerness to secure these economic benefits, Kenya may be forced to make concessions that undermine its commitment to African unity and self-reliance. The African Union, AU, the continental body tasked with promoting unity and cooperation among African states, has long advocated for a common African position on issues of global importance. However, this vision of a united Africa, speaking with one voice on the global stage, has often been undermined by the competing interests of individual member states, many of whom prioritize national self-interest over continental solidarity. Kenya's deepening alliance with the US risks exacerbating these divisions, potentially jeopardizing the AU's efforts to forge a common African agenda. Furthermore, Kenya's close ties with the US could complicate its relations with other African nations, particularly those that view the US with suspicion or hostility. The risk is that Kenya, seen as a Western proxy, could become isolated within the African Union, its